Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Reputation Igniter podcast. If you haven't already done so, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, write a review if you feel so inclined. We're always excited to have you here. We got another awesome episode. I've got Ryden Atzenhofer here from Insight Partners. Thank you so much for being with us, Ryden.
Absolutely, man. I am very excited to be a part of this. I've only been a guest on another show a couple other times, so it's always fun to be the one getting asked instead of being the one asking questions all the time.
Right. Well, hey, we're just going to level up the bar of expectations from you now. So
that's it.
With that insight, we are going to be delving into some incredible insights into customer service and customer relationship building, not just as it relates to the wholesaler distribution side, but also to your customer at the end of that whole sort of supply chain. And so Ryden's going to give us that insight. And again, what we're trying to do here with the Reputation Igniter podcast is just continue to help you improve and elevate your business through tapping into industry leading experts, but also, and most importantly, getting more stories from you as HVAC owners, sharing your zone of genius, as I like to call it, on your aspect of business that you totally dominate and absolutely obsessed with. And so we're always trying to bring more of you on board on this show so that you can be enlightening your fellow HVAC owners, because we always get better together. And ultimately, with the mainstream media out there continuing to demonize entrepreneurs for God knows what reason, as money hungry, greedy people, we really know at our heart that you guys are out there continuing to put food on the table for your family, continuing to put a roof over the head for your employees, and serving your community in a way that most people don't have the guts to do anymore. And so we thank you for that. And we want to continue to help you elevate your business so that the ultimate barrier to entry into our industry is your level of professionalism with which you execute your operation. And so with that, I'm excited to jump in here. Ryan, can you maybe just give us quickly a kind of Reader's Digest version of like how you got into the industry and just like where you're at now and why you're doing all the crazy things that you're doing to kind of help support and drive the industry in a good direction?
Absolutely. So some of you listening to this may have listened to me before. I also, aside from working for Insight Partners, I run the HVAC R&D podcast. Been around for 120 plus episodes. We're getting there.
Nice.
So thank you everyone that listens to me over there and knows me. If you don't know me and you haven't heard my story there, I grew up in a little tiny town in the mountains of North Carolina called Bryson City. My dad was a heating contractor, so I was in a work van from the time I was 5 until he never let me get out of it. So, I grew up where we were. It was, you had to work, you had to figure out the different things. And, I didn't get an allowance. It was either you can go to work or you can figure it out, son. So I went to work. But, from a young age, my dad thought it was very important for me to understand interactions with customers, understand actions with people. So, let's say I was going on a service call, and really at that point, the best thing I was a gopher to run back and forth to the van to get tools. But, he would have a conversation with a customer, and then we'd go back out to the truck and we'd sit there and he'd say, well, what did you think about that person? What did you think about this conversation? So from a young age, he started making me analytically think and break down the situation I was in. In a lot of ways, it kind of also helps you develop, keeping calm under pressure and different things like that. I recorded a show with a guy last night and we talked a lot about soft skills, kind of like that. And that's something that people in our industry struggle with because it's just not something you're used to. But anyway, so I worked my way through summers as a kid. When you're going to work only a couple months out of the year, you end up working where you're most effective. So the majority of my time was either leading a rough-in crew on new construction or like commercial, things like that. Unfortunately, I never really got heavy into the service side of it, outside of just, basic startups and other things like that. But it was hard to go and troubleshoot for 2 months and then you're at school for 10. You come back in the field and it's gone. But, running ductwork and all that stuff stuck a lot easier. So I was running rough-in crews from 13 through 18. When I got out of high school, I tried to run away from HVAC. Didn't work for Dad for about a year, but then went back to work for him 3 or 4 days a week. and I started running different things in the office. So I would handle anything from paying bills to booking calls. I would run sales calls 3 days a week, different things like that, help handle the admin part of the business. So that kind of helped me see the things that we were doing right and all the things that we were doing wrong. My dad never had a formal business education of any kind. So, as I first went to college, I was a history major. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Then, I thought I was going to be a museum curator. That was the goal. Get away from HVAC and play with ancient objects.
Okay.
And then I learned, quickly that to get my doctorate in history, I had to learn to read and write 2 other languages. I had to have mastery of 3 languages. And I can speak English kind of. So I was like, this isn't going to work. So I was a sophomore at Western Carolina University, and I took an entrepreneurial business class as an elective. And I fell in love with that side of the business. Business management was one thing, but I felt like going into a business management degree, you kind of just learned to manage what was there, but you didn't figure out how you got there. And I wanted to understand how you go from point A to point Z as you're trying to run a business, because those were things that I watched my dad struggle with for years. So as I learned through college, I started implementing different things to help him with his business as best I could, or as much as I could, we could headbutt to get through. I actually was the 2010 Young Entrepreneur of the Year for Western Carolina University for what I did with my dad's business.
There you go. Nice.
But as the economy started to kind of crumble in the rural areas in 09 and 10, it hit big cities in 08 and 09, but it took a while to kind of find its way into those other little markets. And it was not good for us. And it was, you started sending home guys that have families. It's like, I can go get a job. So I had just gotten engaged, and I took a job in Greenville, South Carolina. My fiance and I moved down there, and I started, my career in wholesale with a broom in my hand in a warehouse. Because that was the way to get in. I knew what the products were, I knew what materials were, I knew all that stuff, but I didn't know how to use their computer system. So really my main barrier to entry was just learning how to run their sales program. And I went from holding a broom to helping run a counter in about 3 weeks. And then I was promoted to inside sales in 6 months. And then I just never got promoted again. I kind of was helping run the branch. I was doing all this other stuff, and I was watching sales guys get promoted and fail and promoted and fail and promoted and fail around me. And I just kind of, after a year and a half of it going nowhere, I started really trying to say, all right, what's the next step?
Yeah.
So that was, at that point, I was about 2 years in, took a job with a company called Dealer Supply Company. They're headquartered out of Georgia. Took a job in Charlotte as an outside salesperson and kind of didn't look back. And I was there for just right at a decade. Territory Manager of the Year several times, runner-up several times. Sold about $70 million worth of residential equipment and materials in that time period with those guys. But last year, I really just was to a point in my career that if I wasn't going to move up there, do something else, I wanted to have a little bit different of a challenge. And I also wanted to have a working environment that supported the fact that I had the podcast, and I wanted to do other things to help promote the industry, because some companies just don't want you to have something else, unfortunately. And that's the way it is. It doesn't mean they're a bad company. It's just the way it is. So, I took a move to Insight Partners in April of last year. So it'll be a year and about 2 weeks
coming up
for me right there. Because not only did it allow me to continue to work with a lot of the customers I had previously that I could potentially move, but it also opened up my ability to then learn commercial, industrial, and a lot of other big things that I didn't know before. So I took it as it's a challenge as much as it is, it's kind of fun to get to go do this other stuff. Yeah. And we also have, a huge emphasis on community involvement, career growth, all those different things. And those were things that I was looking for in a company as I took a different step.
Yeah. I love that. Well, that's great. Right. And I appreciate you giving us that background. I think it makes it helps us understand you and sort of like all the experiences that you've had. And that's great to hear that Insight Partners is like that, supportive of these things. Like you said, I think there's always going to be companies on all like, sides of the spectrum, but I think, especially as HVAC goes into this sort of like next evolution, right?
Yep.
We really have to be cohesive. It's the reason I started a podcast too, right? From my sort of marketing angle, right? Is like, I want to get a lot of these messages out that people aren't hearing, or there's just so much noise out there too, I think, right? You have to find these trusted channels that you can get that insight from. And so I think that's awesome that Insight Partners is like, very supportive of you doing the HVAC, R&D podcast, so that you can get more information and insight out there. And, looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. And, to your other point though, is like, all of us as companies, like, why wouldn't we be more involved in our industry? Like you're saying, they do community events and all these other kind of things that kind of support the industry. I think as a whole, if we are going to succeed in our industry, is going to continue to evolve and be attractive to the next generation. I think that's another thing that like a lot of my podcast guests are always talking about. It's just like, hey, how do we make ourselves more attractive to the next generation, right? It's, people look at it as it's not a glamorous job. You don't get to slap Google on your back or any of these other like big tech firms, but instead, just going to work for small businesses and going and helping. I think the local core of the economy is so part and parcel and important. So let's dive. Oh, you're going to say something there, Ryan?
So I was going to say,
Yep.
For the show, for HVAC R&D, one of the reasons, it started 3 years ago was, one, we were in the middle of COVID and we couldn't go see our customers, which your customers end up being your best friends a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
But the other, real objective was to find ways that we could help impact growth of our industry. And that's also something, that aligns with the company that I work with now. And, just recently, I was part of the AHR 2024 Workforce Development Program. Nice. So back in October, we went and visited a school called the Chicago Prosser Career Academy. They're a trade-specific school. They have welding, HVAC, several other vocations. It is really the only trade school in Chicago public school systems almost at all.
Wow. Yeah.
And we went up there because part of it is these kids need to have equipment in the lab to train on. Sure. And their lab, unfortunately, was in, a rough, I would say a rough bit of despair. They really don't have a lot of stuff working with. So Bosch Home Comfort donated some equipment that we were able to donate back in October. And when we went up to speak to the kids, the biggest thing that, from the perspective of the show is there's more than just contractors that need future employees. The problem is most of these trade schools are only saying to these kids that they're either going to grow up and turn a wrench or get in a van or crawl under a house or do these other things. But what they're missing is that 2 years in the field could be enough for you to decide maybe you want to do something else. And no one talks about the different jobs that are in wholesale distribution. We need drivers, we need counter guys, we need inside sales, we need outside sales support. Same thing, manufacturers and manufacturers reps need people that do these different jobs. One of the things we did was we, looked around the room and we were asking kids, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do when you grow up?
Yeah.
They're like, well, we want to do marketing. I was like, well, that's awesome. I was like, you know what? You need
don't
marketing.
Don't do it. No,
I'm saying, but we need marketing people in HVAC. Somebody's got to help, build line cards, build promotion material. So all these different things that you learn are actually part of the trades. People don't talk about it. But if you can go get a couple of years in a trade school, that base knowledge of what your industry is translates to all the different places you could go with it.
Well, and I think, you're absolutely right. Right. I think that's the problem is so many people are more, they want fancy things and shiny things on the resume, right? When in reality, your willingness to go and just kind of put some elbow grease in certain areas can give you exposure and experience, like you're talking about, that just will pay dividends along the lines of being able to relate to people more effectively and be able to put yourself in your shoes, right? And that's really kind of the place that you're speaking from, and you're also, building those relationships with your customers and you're serving your customers because of all the experience that you had right, with your dad, just trying to make ends meet and try to scale at different like points in the business, and realizing, just how, the choices the business owner makes is having an impact on the employees and stuff like that. And so I think there's just a lot to be said when you have experience in the industry, right? It's like why I felt more comfortable specializing in HVAC was just all of my time in service in the Navy and the reactor mechanical division, and just dealing with all that stuff. Now, it wasn't on land, it was on a ship, right? But it's still like understanding the engineering behind those systems, how they work, the maintenance, the operation, like all that kind of stuff. It just makes me understand the complexities of our industry, and how we can kind of help them navigate that stuff. So let's dive into it. Help me understand. I think that, we hear a lot about customer relationships and building those with our customers, whether that's in the residential side where it's the homeowner, right? Or the commercial where it's the building owner, right? Or the industrial where it's the, landowner, right? So I understand that part. And maybe if you could just kind of walk us back, like, why do you think, or if you could, openly talk to a business owner and just like not have your, I'm trying to sell you stuff hat on. Why do you think it's an important piece for them to develop a relationship with their wholesale distributor? And what benefits can really come from investing in that relationship? And maybe you can kind of tackle like, hey, should you have multiple relationships? Should you talk to multiple people, or should you invest in just one? I'd just be kind of curious, like what your perspective is on that, and maybe where the opportunity lies for a business owner to, capitalize on building that relationship.
So, if I'm going to talk from specifically the wholesale side, just come to me. I'll take care of everything. But having been a contractor, but also, seeing how these guys have to run their business, unfortunately, and, any distributor that I would work for probably would hate to hear me say this, but there's no one distributor that can fix every problem you have. It's just not possible. Whether it be location, availability, what they have, what they specialize in. I think it is very, very important as a trades business owner, whether it's HVAC, plumbing, electrical, any of them. Mm-hmm. It's important to have, in most cases, you're always going to have your primary guy that probably gets 60 to 70% of your business. He's the guy you trust. He's the guy you call. He's the guy that answers his phone.
Yep.
But you're also going to have a couple other distributors that are support distributors that handle other things that you specialize in or need.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have those relationships, honestly, with every distributor. I think it's important as a salesperson in my job. I should know salespeople at every other distributor, because guess what? Every now and then, collaboration over competition is a much better solution.
Right.
And if you keep good relationships with, friends close, enemies closer, as they would say. But if you keep good relationships with the people in your industry as a whole, you will be so much more successful. But again, back to the business perspective, yes, you should definitely invest time in your main guy, but you should also spend time with your other salespeople. One, because it keeps all your sales guys honest.
Yep. Yeah, it's true.
It does. And, I was lucky enough that, growing up, my dad had several really, really good salespeople, but he also had some that were terrible. And my whole goal is, as I went into wholesale, I wanted to be the sales guy that I had never had, but wished I could have had. So you want a salesperson that's knowledgeable, that's been in the field, that understands what you're talking about, but can also sit down with you at the end of the day and be like, well, what are your goals for 2024? Where do you want to finish? What do you want to do? How do we have what we need for you in place? How do you track your inventory? How do you track your new sales? What's your process of, well, I sold a job today. When does it go in? What's your lead time for getting equipment from your supplier? How do you handle all those things? So, understanding the logistics of distribution as you develop it also helps you set all those different expectations with a customer.
Yeah.
But then when it comes back to the relationship on the distribution side, your branch manager, your truck drivers, your counter guys, they better like you, because they're the ones that are cashing all the checks that you go write.
Right.
Because you can promise anything you want to a customer, but if you don't have the support team to get it there, that you know will deliver when you say, hey, it's going to be there at 10 and they're there at 9:59, right on time. It's a whole different ballgame. And I think that's how contractors, over time should pick who they're buying from. I hate to say this too. It's not always about the brand of equipment. It's about the support you get from the supplier and the trust you have in the people you deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
Most manufacturers these days build a good piece of equipment. It's how it gets put in that what matters.
Yep. I love like what you're just saying. Obviously, number one, don't have one distributor, right? But have multiple distributors. And I think, if nothing else, right, not just to have a backup plan when like the number one can't fulfill, but like people do age out of the industry, right? Whether it's through their age or different desires and all that kind of stuff, right? Like you want to have another relationship. You don't want to be a $4 or $5, $6 million company and then have your primary guy just be like, yeah, I'm going into retirement, or hey, I'm gonna change, review things, right? I think it's important to understand that like you should have that relationship so that if you need that second guy to come in line, that can happen. And I think also too, my hope is like, and I'm sure you do this a lot, right? But if you're the number two guy, just be like, I'm cool being your number two. I will be your number one over time, right? Because you're going to see that, I'm always there for you kind of thing, right? Not obviously perfectly, but.
And you can't expect when you go make the first call to a new customer. If you walk out of there with an order or some kind of big order and you had never known this guy at all, there's probably a reason, and you probably don't want to know what it is.
Yeah.
If you walk out of there, unless his number one absolutely 5 minutes beforehand just blew it.
Yeah.
There's, you've got to be, like, I don't know about that. So you got to feel it, because a lot of times if you immediately get an order or something, because unfortunately the guy's got credit issues somewhere or something else, you got to careful what you walk into on some of those. But,
sure.
Whenever I would call on someone, especially when I first started, at this point, I have a lot more relationships now than I did before. But when I first started, it was where do you need help? What problem can't you solve? Let's see if I can help figure it out.
There you go.
You go from being, the guy that's just knocking on the door, like, hey, I've got this today, or hey, I've got this today. You become a trusted solutions provider to them. And that's how you start building that reputation. You take care of the problems he's got. You help him solve them. You help him talk through different things. Calls you at 7:00 at night and he's trying to figure something out. If you can take the call and help him.
Yeah.
Be that little bit different for them as well. And that's how you build and develop that relationship, is you just get in there and you be honest, you do your job, and you grow it from there.
Yeah. Well, it just goes back to what you were talking about. Is I think so many people oftentimes can be so myopic about like what they're doing, right? And it's just me and getting my sale for me so that I get my check at the end of the day, right? And what you're saying is like, obviously you talked about, collaboration over competition, but more so in the sense that like our industry is really small, right?
It is.
As massive as it is, it's very, very small.
It is.
Right.
It is.
And it's important, like you said, and it's not just like on the customer side. Like you can't, obviously as an HVAC owner, you can't go like, you would never do this to like a customer. Like you're always going to be kind to the customer, right? But don't be kind to the customer, turn around and, be mean to your employees or be mean to your distributors or vendors or anything like that, right? And I know I'm speaking to the choir when I'm talking to my audience, because like you're not listening to this if you're somebody who's got a chip on your shoulder and you got an edge to you, right? But it's one of those things that you want to make sure that everybody's taken care of around you, because those are the people that when times get tough, they're going to take care of you in return, right? And realizing like the whole thing does not move with any of those parts missing.
No,
right?
It doesn't.
And that's the important piece that you're kind of talking about, is like, hey, you got to make sure that, and then to add on to that, you're taking it to the next level, right? Like you're trying to be, a trusted advisor, if you will.
Yep.
Right. And I think anybody in sales, anybody that's smart about the future of their business, is going to have a big Rolodex, so that when you, like you said, you walk into the office and say, hey, what's your biggest problem? They're like, hiring. You're like, well, I don't have a part for that, but I do have a guy for that, right? Or a
That's
girl
it.
for that, right?
That's it.
And I think that's the important piece, right? Is making sure that you are a solutions provider, even if it isn't in your like initial wheelhouse of who pays your W-2, right? So
Absolutely. You know, a lot of times it's important to know where to find it. You might not always know how to use it, but if you know where to find the answer and help provide something like, hey, that's not my expertise, but I know this guy, he's great. Give him a call.
yeah,
Just like you're saying. So it's the other thing is as you build relationships with these customers, don't just get to know the owner. Don't just get to know the manager. Know everybody in that building you can know.
yeah,
Because again, it's a giant small industry. And this guy that was a service tech over here for 5 years may decide to go get his license, start his own business. And because you were the one sales guy out of all the ones he saw over 5 years for the company that he bought from that talked to him and treated him like another human being, you're the first guy he calls when he wants to open his business.
yeah,
So always think about the long term of everything in this game in sales. As much as we want to say it's about now, 90% of it's a long game.
yeah. Oh, and to that very point, like I literally, just a recent client of mine, he was an introduction from a wholesale distributor guy out here in Texas, and he had just opened up his company after being with a bigger outfit, right?
Yep.
And it was because he had that pre-existing relationship interfacing with him, because I think he was running the commercial side for that business, and then he left the bigger guy to go start his own outfit. Well, who did he call, right?
Yep.
He called Sam, right? So I think that's what's so important, is like realizing that, hey, no, that really does happen, right? Like it's just, you don't know, and you don't know who, and you don't know when, right? And I think that's always the hard part, right? You just can't, like, people aren't walking around with dollar signs above their head in terms of like how much you can cash out for, right? But it's just investing in those relationships, sowing those seeds. It's also what's going to allow you to go to sleep at night and not toss and turn, right? Is knowing that nobody's coming to hunt you down, right? If anything, they're coming to shake your hand and thank you.
No, and that's the truth. That's the truth. You know, I've tried very hard in the 11 years I've been in this market to make, you know, many, many more friends than I would ever make enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say, so I'm going to ask this question, and that might kind of wrap it up with one last question. Then I didn't tell you what I was going to ask, but I think you'll be good on your toes. So if there was something that I think, like, is there a question that you think an HVAC owner who's listening should ask of their wholesaler, that would help maybe give them a window into, shed some light on, like, what would be the question you would recommend to really kind of maybe be the one that maybe first opens that door to kind of create and deepen that relationship? Is there any question in particular that they should ask of their wholesaler to kind of maybe change the trajectory of it being, instead of like a very transactional relationship, it be much more of transformational? I don't know. I'm on a lack of words there, but you know, something that really is a collaboration type trajectory over the more transactional. Anything that kind of comes to mind that, you know, I think if a client asked you, you'd be like, okay, we're on a different trajectory with our relationship, and I'm glad you asked that question. What would that be?
I think, you know, sometimes we forget to be personal with people.
Yeah, that's true.
We, like you said, we get stuck in that trap of this is a transactional phone call. Like, hey, I need a 2-ton system tomorrow. Okay, I'll have it to you this.
Right.
I think what makes the difference with an owner is when you open the conversation, you know you're there to talk business, but hey, man, how's the family?
Mm-hmm.
How was your trip? How was this? How was that? What do you got going on? And I think the same thing, the business owner needs to ask the salespeople the same thing.
Yeah.
Because that's how you get on that different level of a relationship. If you don't ask personal questions of one another, and if you don't ask, you know, what's your goal in 5 years? You know, what's your goal tomorrow? Ask the questions that actually matter in a relationship, as opposed to the questions that matter for a transaction.
Yeah.
You know, that's great. How much is your 2-ton heat pump? It's 1902. whatever.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing personal there. It's just literally a transaction of a number and answer. You know,
Yeah.
dig deep.
Yeah.
Dig deep.
I mean,
If you want to figure out which sales guy is really your guy,
yeah.
start asking number 2 and number 3 some of those deeper questions and see what you get out of it.
Yeah.
And just see. Because if you open up to people and they'll open up back to you, that's when you transcend from just business partner and transactional
Yeah.
person to you're developing a relationship over time.
Yeah.
But if you can't ever get past the dollar sign on either side of the fence, it just
Right.
is what it is, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and theoretically, I mean, I assume if you're listening to this podcast, like you're a person who already asked those questions of your employees. Like, why not ask them of somebody who is serving you in a way, right? And you know, the component there too, I think, is you're going to get a window into their life and understand how long they plan to be around, right?
Yep.
Like, hey, you know, what's your 5-year plan, right? Just trying to understand, like, are you with the business? Like, are you going to be with the same business, or are you going to be with a different business in 5 years, right? Or are you not going to be the territory manager, but you want to be the sales man, you know, the sales manager or whatever, right? So I think those are all great ones. Okay, Ryan, let's do this last question. What do you wish I had asked you that I have not asked you yet?
Oh.
Yeah.
See, I wasn't prepared for this.
I know. This is why I like this question. This is something when I started my company 11 years ago in BNI, like I'd always wrap up our one-to-ones with that question, because I think there's things that people are always itching. I'm going to give you some time, right? There's things that people are just like itching to tell you that like it burns them not to share this like piece of wisdom. So I'm always trying to like call that out of people. So anyways, did anything kind of bubble up to the surface that you're like, man, I wish more people knew X or something along those lines?
Honestly, at this point, I really can't even think of which one you should have asked, considering the topic of our conversation. Put on the spot.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. That's a great question. It's a great question to not have an answer to. That's kind of like when someone calls me and they're looking for something and I don't have it. I'm like, you know, it's a great place for a supply house. You know?
Yeah.
Kind of that thing. I would almost say, you know, what actually made you want to go into sales at all?
Okay.
And even with that being the question you asked, I'm not 100% sure. I just like people. I like people. I like, you know, the cold call and the phone call is hard. I much prefer going and seeing people face to face. I sold insurance for like 9 months and it was nothing but cold calls and I hated it. Not saying that I'm not willing to do cold calls. That was a whole different level of cold call right there.
Yeah.
You know, that's just tough to do. But I think it's just, you know, why did I want to get into sales? Because I love people. And if you can be a people person, you can figure out how to sell anything. And it's also, I think everybody has to realize that we're all salespeople all day long. We're all selling something, whether we're selling ourselves or we're selling an idea, we're selling something else. I don't care what you do for a career. You are a salesperson. So think about that the next time you have a conversation with somebody.
Yeah. And instead of fighting it, like I think a lot of us, right? You were fighting like, I don't want to get into that industry. I'm going to go as far as I can. I'm going to go into the dirt in a different way. Yeah.
No more. Yeah.
I don't want to crawl into crawl spaces. You know, I want to instead go, you know, with a brush and, you know, dust off dirt in a pit. Wait, that's kind of the same thing, right? You know? So that's cool, man. And like you said, I think sometimes the things we run from are the very things we need to face in order to move forward in life. Right. So, Ryden, with that, let's wrap up, man. What if somebody wants to get a hold of you, connect with you, pick your brain on more stuff, you know, work with you and Insight Partners, or just plug into the podcast? Can you give us what's the best way to kind of get a hold of you and ring your bell for something?
So the easiest way to find me is go to hvacrnd.com, which, depending on whatever is your favorite streaming platform, you can link straight to us to Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, anywhere. You can link to all those straight through the website. Or you can also find me on Instagram or TikTok at hvac.rnd. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Trade Hounds, which is a trade-specific app that a lot of people still don't talk about. And then also Facebook as the HVAC R&D podcast. But I would say probably Instagram and LinkedIn are my two most active. And then obviously you can search Ryden Atzenhofer on LinkedIn and find me there as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ryden. So grateful that you're here. Grateful that Insight Partners let you kind of come on as a guest and just share your insight in the industry. And again, for all of you listening, please to just ensure that you get the next episode when it drops. Make sure that you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Again, reviews are a great way to just share this podcast. And we would just ask that you share this with just one person. Somebody out there probably need to hear something that Ryden shared today. And we would just appreciate you kind of disseminating some great information, helping our industry get stronger, so that, again, the only barrier to entry is the level of professionalism with which we are executing our organization. So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Take care, everybody, and see you then.